Dubro Suspicion Files.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are opening the file on a case that didn't just rattle Japan, it fundamentally altered the national psychology. We are talking about the Setagaya family murders, the unsolved crime that stands as the most resource-intensive cold case in the history of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department.
And it's a deep dive that's so necessary because this murder, discovered on the very last day of the year 2000, it didn't just make headlines. It catastrophically shattered the Anzin Shinwa, which is Japan's really deep-seated myth of social safety and, domestic security.
It was the perfect, horrible punctuation mark to close out a tumultuous 20th century.
It really was.
So our mission today is to take the comprehensive, decades-long forensic report and really unpack it for you. We're moving beyond just the basic timeline. We want to truly understand the overwhelming amount of evidence the killer left behind, the perplexing psychological anomaly of his post-mortem actions, and the profound sociological fallout that, it continues to this day.
We're focusing on the Miyazawa family, Mikio, Yasuko, Nina, and Little Ray. Their lives really represented the idealized, modern, successful, urban Japanese family. And their brutal, complete destruction introduced this unprecedented fear. The realization that your private domestic sanctuary offered absolutely no defense against this inexplicable, cold-blooded malice.
The structural paradox of this case is everything. How can a crime be so brutally chaotic and yet, at the same time, include hours of calm, almost domestic inhabitation by the killer? We're calling that the cold-blooded interregnum. We're going to investigate how advanced forensic science converged with all the subsequent political and xenophobic conspiracy theories that were driven by that physical evidence.
Ultimately, the question we're asking is, what does this unresolved trauma, this sort of ghost in the park, what does it tell us about modern society and the stories we build to explain violence?
Okay, so let's start by setting the scene, both historically and sociologically. Why did this particular crime resonate so deeply in Japan in the year 2000?
Well, to connect this to the bigger picture, you have to understand that Japan in late 2000 was a nation trying to define itself. It was just coming out of what's widely known as the lost decade.
Right, the economic stagnation after the bubble burst in the 90s.
Exactly. And this wasn't just an economic crisis, it was a crisis of confidence. The social structures that had really defined post-war stability were, they were fraying at the edges.
And how did that change the way people actually lived day to day?
It created a kind of urban isolation. The traditional ideal of, say, a three-generation family all living together was rapidly giving way to the nuclear family unit. So you had successful middle-class people like the Miyazawas focused on their careers, on their family success, living in these seemingly desirable areas like Setagaya Ward. But they were often very isolated in their own little domestic bubbles.
And just completely reliant on that social contract of safety and order.
Absolutely. The reliance on social compliance and order was total.
And the date of the crime, December 30th, 2000, that just amplifies the anxiety tenfold.
Well, it absolutely does. The turn of the century, Shikamatsu, was heavy with this apocalyptic anxiety everywhere, the whole Y2K thing. But in Japan, where order is so highly prized, the randomness of events like the sarin gas attacks a few years earlier, plus the economic turmoil, made that transition feel especially fraught.
And this happened during Omisoka New Year's Eve preparations.
The time of highest familial safety. It's when families come together. For the family home to be just utterly violated and extinguished at that exact moment, it turned this general sociological discomfort into a kind of paralyzing national terror.
So the message the public received was brutal. If the Miyazawas, successful, stable, playing by all the rules, if they could be wiped out for no reason, then nobody was safe.
That's the psychological impact, right there. The crime suggested that even perfect adherence to social norms offered zero protection from the randomness of modern targeted violence. The sanctuary itself was corrupted.
Okay, let's pivot to the physical scene. The house at 32326 Kamisoshigaya in Setagaya Ward. The geography wasn't just incidental, was it? It was a primary facilitator of the crime.
The location itself is absolutely crucial to understanding the killer's opportunity. Setagaya is typically a very dense residential area, but this specific spot was a geographic anomaly. It was a self-made pocket of isolation.
Oh, so?
The Tokyo Metropolitan Government has started this program of systematically purchasing and demolishing homes that surrounded the Miyazawa residence. The goal was to expand Soshigaya Park.
So by the end of 2000, their house was basically standing almost alone.
Almost completely alone. one of only 4 households left in that little cluster, bordering a huge, dark construction zone on one side and a sprawling park on the others.
Which gave the killer perfect cover.
Perfect cover, both visual and auditory. Visually, there were no immediate active neighbors on 3 sides to see him approach or see any activity in the house. But even more importantly, the auditory cover was perfect. In dense Tokyo, the sound of a struggle, a window breaking, that would immediately trigger a phone call to the police. Here, the ambient noise from the massive park, wind in the trees, distant traffic, maybe even skaters in the nearby skate park, it would have masked any sound of forced entry or a fight.
And the park wasn't just cover for the approach. It was the perfect escape route.
It was a black hole of egress, multiple unmonitored paths leading away into the darkness. Once the killer crossed back over that park fence, they could just vanish into the wider city without passing directly in front of any active houses or, monitored roads.
So let's get into the house itself. The architecture and the actual point of entry, which required a fair bit of planning and physical skill.
The house was this distinctive 3-story structure, slightly elevated off the ground. The point of entry was the second-floor bathroom window. Now, this window was deliberately small. It was set high up, really just for ventilation, and it was protected by a wire mesh screen. The killer had carefully removed that screen and set it aside.
That detail alone implies he'd watched the house. He knew the layout, or at least he'd figured out how to get in without making a lot of noise.
It suggests observation, planning, and, frankly, significant physical capability. Forensic trajectory analysis suggests the killer climbed the park fence, used the top of that fence as a foothold, and then had to hoist himself up to this narrow window ledge.
That's not easy.
No, that action requires serious upper body strength and agility. It's consistent with a young, fit male, maybe someone involved in climbing, or, and this is critical, someone associated with the local skate park subculture.
And that brings the geography right back to a potential motive. There was documented friction between the family and the local youth, wasn't there?
That's right. Our sources confirm that Mikio Miyazawa had documented conflicts with the youths who frequented the adjacent skate park. It was likely about noise, maybe trespassing, or just their general behavior on the edge of his property. This strongly links the geographic isolation to a potential motive, a location-based grievance that just escalated catastrophically. The skater theory is founded squarely on this unique geography and the physical ability required to get in.
Okay, let's reconstruct those final hours. This is where the ordinary life of the Miyazawas just collides with this extraordinary violence. What do we know about their evening on December 30th?
We can actually track them pretty precisely up until the intrusion. The pre-incident phase shows a totally typical family day. They were confirmed to be out shopping around 6:00 p.m. Dinner followed, likely between 7:00 and 9:00 p.m. And we know that because forensic pathology confirmed their meal, specifically identifying remnants of sesame and spinach in their stomach contents, which helped pinpoint the likely time of the attack.
And Mikio was working late.
He was a self-employed consultant, so yes. He sent his last known work-related email from his first-floor study at 10:38 p.m.
So less than an hour later, maybe even just a few minutes, the intrusion began.
That's the high probability window, yeah. Around 10:00 p.m., a witness actually reported seeing a man who matched the general suspect description. Young, dark clothing, moving quickly near the back of the house. The intrusion itself, climbing the fence and getting through that bathroom window, likely happened between 11:00 and 11:30 p.m., right after Mikio finished that email.
The first victim he encountered was 6-year-old Ray. That's anomalous for a planned break-in.
It's profoundly chilling and highly anomalous. For a typical home invasion, the first priority is always to neutralize the adult male threat. Always. But Ray was found strangled in his sleep on the second floor, right after the killer entered. The autopsy showed no defensive wounds.
So he didn't even wake up.
It suggests a swift, silent killing, likely with bare hands or some kind of soft ligature. This order suggests one of two things. Either the killer just entered the easiest, nearest room first and neutralized the threat as he found it, or he was so focused on a silent intrusion that killing the child first was deemed critical to avoid being discovered.
And Mikio must have been alerted by the movement upstairs, rushing up from his study on the first floor.
That's the consensus, yes. Mikio rushed upstairs, almost certainly to defend his family, and he encountered the killer on the stairs or on that small mezzanine landing, and a fierce, desperate struggle began.
What was the weapon?
The killer was armed with a long, specialized kitchen knife, a yanagiba, or a sashimi knife. They're known for their extremely sharp, slender, single-beveled blade.
And the weaponology here is just so stark. Mikio fought back hard. He had multiple defensive wounds on his hands and arms.
The thing about a yanagiba knife is it's a precision instrument. It's not made for combat. It doesn't have a hilt or a safety guard. The wounds on Mikio show he was actively trying to grab or block the blade. And crucially, during this violent struggle, the tip of the knife actually broke off inside Mikio's skull.
Wow.
It speaks to the sheer force and velocity of the blow. But even with his primary weapon now functionally broken, the killer didn't stop. He continued the assault until Mikio collapsed at the bottom of the stairs.
The broken tip is a fantastic forensic marker, but it also signals this transition in the killer's plan. His main weapon is gone, but the assault just continues, and it escalates dramatically towards Yasuko and 8-year-old Nina, who are in the third-floor loft.
He needed another weapon, so he went down to the kitchen and retrieved the family's own sentoku knife, a general-purpose knife. The fact that he was calm enough to search their kitchen and select a new weapon, rather than, fleeing or just improvising with something else, it speaks volumes about his psychological state. He was absolutely determined to finish this. He went back upstairs to the loft where Yasuko and Nina were trapped.
The attack on the mother and daughter, the reports describe it as prolonged and savage. This is the point of just complete overkill.
Absolutely. The violence here was qualitatively different from the silent killing of Rei or the combat encounter with Mikio. Yasuko and Nina sustained dozens and dozens of stab wounds. Blood spatter analysis indicated they were huddled together, likely trying to shield each other. The trauma inflicted, especially the wounds to Yasuko's face and neck, suggests a profound, rage-fueled, or possibly personal element. Overkill is violence that goes way beyond what's needed to subdue or kill. This level of sustained fury points strongly away from efficiency and towards a very deep-seated emotional or pathological rage.
And now we enter the phase that makes the Setagaya case a staple of criminal psychology. The killer did not flee the scene. He stayed inside the house among the bodies for hours.
This is the defining feature, this disturbed inhabitation. The most conservative estimates place his stay at 2 to 3 hours. But some of the evidence, particularly that second computer connection attempt, pushes the window potentially up to 10 hours.
10 hours? I can't even fathom that.
It implies a staggering level of psychological detachment, a complete lack of fear of being caught, and this sense of profound territorial confidence. He wasn't panicking, he was claiming the space.
So let's detail his actions during this interregnum. He treated the scene like his own home, starting with what he ate.
He conducted a calm, pretty extensive raid of the family's refrigerator. He ate 4 plastic cups of ice cream, he drank their barley tea, their mugicha, and he ate melon. And forensic odontology, the study of bite marks on those plastic ice cream cups, provided a small but really unique psychological window.
What did they find?
He didn't use a spoon. He squeezed the plastic cups and bit directly into the frozen ice cream. It suggests an almost savage primal eating style, which contrasts so bizarrely with the casual domestic act of just having some ice cream. The empty cups were left near the computer, and one was found in the bathtub.
And while he's having this strange little snack, he's also actively bleeding from a significant cut on his hand.
That's right. The cut to his right hand, which he likely got when his own Yanagiba knife slipped, was deep, and it was bleeding profusely. This is where he made his most critical error, but it's also what gave us the ultimate evidence. He used the family's first aid kit to treat the wound.
And he used something very specific to stop the bleeding.
He did. He used sanitary pads, feminine hygiene products to staunch the heavy blood flow.
Why is the use of sanitary pads so informative? What does that tell us?
It suggests a couple of things. First, resourcefulness in an urgent situation. He recognized the high absorbency of the material. But second, it points either to desperation or maybe an intimate knowledge of domestic supplies. It could tie into that drifter or worker theory, someone who lived out of necessity and was just used to using whatever was available. Most importantly, his type A blood was left everywhere, on light switches, door handles, towels, the medical supplies. It provided investigators with a pristine, complete, untouched DNA profile.
This is where the horror truly meets the mundane, the internet activity. He sat at Mikio's computer desk just a few feet from the bodies, and he browsed the internet.
At approximately 1:18 a.m. on December 31st, the killer was lucid enough to engage in a really complex cognitive task, using a computer. He browsed the website of the Shiki Theater Company. Specifically, he focused on the page for the musical The Lion King, and he actually made attempts to book tickets. This is just utterly bewildering behavior.
Attempting to book theater tickets hours after committing a quadruple murder. I mean, what is the accepted psychological interpretation of that extreme cognitive dissonance?
Criminal psychologists suggest this wasn't panic. It was a ritual of normalization. Following the extreme adrenaline surge of the violence, the killer needed to ground himself. Engaging in a banal, pre-planned, or habitual activity like online shopping or booking tickets can serve as this complex psychological mechanism to affirm their own normalcy and lucidity, even while they're literally immersed in carnage. It speaks to a staggering, perhaps clinically diagnosable level of psychopathy or profound detachment.
And then there's the ambiguity of the morning connection. Around 10:00 a.m. on New Year's Eve, did he really stay that long?
That 10:00 a.m. connection is a lingering question mark. I mean, if he stayed through the daylight hours and potentially slept in the house, that's an exponential increase in the risk of capture. It severely contradicts the calculated nature of the entry. Later forensic analysis did suggest the possibility of an automated connection being triggered. Maybe the mouse was accidentally bumped by the killer leaving, or even later by Yasuko's mother when she discovered the scene. But that initial, terrifying possibility remains. A killer so confident he was willing to spend the night with his victims.
And the final act of defiance. The non-flushed feces.
He used the second-floor toilet, but deliberately did not flush. The forensic value was limited. It contained traces of the sesame and string beans from his post-intrusion meal, and it didn't provide a DNA match in any databases. But the psychological interpretation is key. Criminal psychologists view this as a powerful act of soiling the territory. It's a final insult and a definitive nonverbal marker of total dominance over the family's domestic sanctuary. It's the killer leaving his ultimate signature on their existence.
So the killer was just completely disorganized in his exit. He changed his blood-soaked clothes at the scene and left behind this enormous inventory of personal items. He essentially left a complete profile of his habits and potential origins. This is the cornerstone of the whole investigation.
We can piece together a very detailed, albeit contradictory, profile from the dozens of items he left behind. The man-cub's belongings, as they've been called. He left wearing Mikio's clothes, which put distance between his violence and his physical identity. But in doing so, he abandoned his whole life in that house.
Let's start with the biggest piece of clothing, the 𝐏𝐿𝐃𝐂𝐀𝐒 jacket.
Okay, so it was a black Down Air Tech jacket, size large. Now, while 𝐏𝐿𝐃𝐂𝐀𝐒 is mass-produced, the police were able to trace the batch. Only 130 units of this specific size and color were sold in the Tokyo area, and they linked it specifically to the Setagaya branch. That already suggests he was geographically tethered to the general region.
But the microscopic trace evidence in the pockets is where the geographical clues get really interesting.
Right. The pockets contained all this environmental trace evidence. Zelkova tree pollen, willow leaves, and bird droppings. This immediately suggests the wearer frequently spent time in parks or wooded areas, which aligns with that skater park proximity theory. But here is the most sophisticated detail. Chemical analysis of detergent residue on the jacket indicated it was washed in hard water.
And why is the hard water detail so important in Japan, a country that's known for having soft water?
It's a major anomaly. It points to three main possibilities. One, he washed the jacket abroad, for instance, in parts of Korea or Europe which use hard water. Or two, he washed it in a specific known hard water region in Japan, most notably the Miura Peninsula. This instantly links the killer's profile to potential international travel or to a specific localized area of Japan known for a different geology, suggesting he wasn't a standard permanent Tokyo resident.
And what about the rest of his clothes? Did they reinforce that aesthetic profile?
They did. There was a long-sleeved raglan shirt purple body, gray sleeves, size M. A generic, heavily washed item. The style itself, oversized, the specific color blocking, was highly characteristic of the skater or emerging hip-hop aesthetic that was popular among, marginalized youth groups in the late 90s. Yeah. This just further solidified that connection to the skate park subculture. They also found a gray t-shirt, a wool bucket hat with a specific late 90s weave, a green check scarf, and black Eddie Bauer leather palm gloves, which were only sold in Japan between 1998 and 2000.
But the cornerstone of the entire foreign element theory that rests on the shoes, the Slazenger sneaker.
That's right. The sneakers were sized 27.5 centimeters, which converts roughly to a U.S. size 9.5 or 10. More importantly, it corresponds to a specific Korean metric size. The distinct complex tread pattern was mapped all through the house. And here's the critical finding. The specific Slazenger model was never sold through authorized retail channels in Japan. It was, however, widely available in South Korea at discount retailers.
So we have a man who's a larger size for a typical Japanese male who walks with a distinct gait. What did the wear pattern tell us?
The wear pattern on the sole suggested the owner walked with a slight supination, meaning his foot rolls outward rather than inward or neutral. This is a crucial physical trait that could help identify him. And when you combine that with the non-domestic retail origin, this evidence immediately suggested an international component, polarizing the investigation towards Korea or maybe overseas military bases.
Let's talk about the dark green hip bag, the fanny pack, which contains some of the most contradictory evidence of all.
Yeah, the hip bag held some fascinating microscopic debris. Initial mineralogical analysis of sand grains found inside was truly sensational. Investigators linked the quartz and feldspar ratio and the wind erosion characteristics to sand from near Edwards Air Force Base in the Mojave Desert, California.
Wow. So that immediately drove the American GI theory.
It did, sensationally. But that analysis wasn't definitive, and it was eventually revised to align with the local geography.
Huh.
Exactly. Later, more comprehensive analysis revealed that the sand grains perfectly matched the imported material used to construct the ramps at the Setagaya Park skate park material that's often imported to meet specific California skating standards. It also matched sand from a major skate park on the Miura Peninsula in Kanagawa. So this synthesis powerfully connects the killer, despite that initial sensational finding, right back to the local skate subculture and the specific location of the crime.
And the bag also contained two other compelling traces: fluorescent dye and silicon carbide residue.
The dye is similar to the kind used in theater production markers or even construction markers. This ties into the possibility that the killer was a student of the arts or maybe a temporary construction worker involved in the park expansion. The silicon carbide is residue from skateboard grip tape. Again, this just powerfully reinforces the skater profile. And finally, a handkerchief in the bag had traces of Drakkar Noir perfume, a very strong, distinctive cologne associated with 80s and 90s club culture, which was highly popular among American GIs stationed in Japan at that time.
So this overwhelming but totally contradictory inventory: Korean shoes, a Japanese jacket, American perfume, local skate park sand. It paints a picture of a drifter in the interstice, someone who's moving between different communities and even countries.
It describes someone who is not fully integrated into any single community, but borrows elements from several, maintaining a kind of marginalization while being physically present. And the final item, the murder weapon, the Sekimagoroku Yanagiba knife, was traced to a batch sold at a local supermarket in the Setagaya Suganami area. This suggests the killer either bought it locally, specifically for the attack, or maybe carried it for self-defense, which was common in some youth gangs.
We have the clothes, the shoes, the sand. But the DNA left behind by the killer's profusely bleeding right hand is the genetic fingerprint of who he is. So what happened when his type A blood profile was run against Japanese databases?
The killer's profile did not generate a single match against any of the extensive domestic Japanese fingerprint or DNA databases, and that's a pool of over 10 million records. This immediately created what we've been calling the globalization gap. This fundamental lack of a domestic match led investigators and the public directly to the non-Japanese citizen hypothesis.
And then the controversial DNA phenotyping begins, which reveals a complex and really ambiguous genetic profile.
This is where the sociology of the crime really kicks in. The paternal lineage, the Y-DNA, belonged to haplogroup O2A2B1A1, which is statistically more prevalent in Korean and Chinese populations than it is in typical Japanese populations. So that immediately reinforced the Asian outsider theory.
But the mother's side complicated things.
It did. The maternal lineage, the mtDNA, was a common Asian haplogroup, but it exhibited specific age-race-related markers, a genetic sequence that denotes Southern European gene flow.
So the DNA profile wasn't just Chinese or Korean, it suggested a mixed heritage. The killer was possibly of mixed Asian and European descent, fueling this hafu or mixed race theory.
The ambiguity was profound, and this unique mixed profile had an immediate and destructive sociological impact. The release of this complex foreign marker information basically provided the Japanese public with a psychological mechanism to distance themselves from the atrocity. By framing the crime as an external import carried out by someone genetically foreign, society could protect its cherished self-image of homogeneity, harmony, and social order.
So this forensic data, which was designed to bring clarity, it was instead weaponized to validate pre-existing xenophobic narratives.
It was a collective defense mechanism against an internal trauma. Platforms like the massive online bulletin board 2-channel, which is now 5-channel, they just exploded with narratives confirming the foreign killer hypothesis. The argument was that this level of savage, prolonged malice just wasn't possible from a domestic product of Japanese society. The difficult truth, that the killer might be a localized product of Japan's fractured modern social fabric, was just easier to dismiss if the DNA pointed elsewhere.
Okay, let's break down the four main suspect theories that have dominated the investigation and weigh the forensic evidence against each one. First, the Korean drifter theory.
This theory is very strong when you look at the physical evidence. The support comes from the Slazenger shoes, which were a Korea-exclusive retail item, the O2A DNA marker being statistically common in Korea, and the hard water washing trace on the Uniqlo jacket, pointing to potential residence or travel abroad. However, the theory is weakened by the chaotic, highly personal, non-professional behavior during that interregnum. It's just not typical for organized, transient criminal elements who are focused on a quick gain.
Right. Second, the American GI dependent theory, which relies heavily on that American military influence.
This one relies on the initial, sensational Mojave Desert sand link to Edwards Air Force Base, the Drakkar Noir perfume traces that were popular with GIs, and the large shoe size. A confrontational motive linked to the park is plausible here. But the contradiction is massive. The DNA profile is predominantly Asian or mixed Asian-European. It is not Caucasian dominant, which makes this theory highly implausible unless the GI was of Asian American descent.
And we can probably dispense with the Chinese burglary ring theory pretty quickly.
Yes. That theory just falls apart completely under the weight of the cold-blooded inhabitation evidence. Organized criminal rings prioritize speed, silence, and evasion. They do not stay for hours to eat ice cream, browse the internet, or leave copious amounts of their own DNA. And the minimal amount of money stolen, around 150,000 yen, clearly shows that robbery was secondary to the act of homicide and territorial domination.
Which brings us back to the theory with the highest probability, the skater domestic mix theory.
This is the most complex profile. It's supported by the Setagaya skate park sand, the grip tape residue, the whole skater aesthetic of the clothing, the knowledge of the park as an entry and escape point, and the proximity to that location-based grievance. The major contradiction, which the investigation still struggles with, is the extreme, savage violence. It just requires a profound, deep-seated psychopathology to escalate a minor noise complaint or a confrontation into a savage quadruple murder. It suggests a killer who is already prone to lethal violence.
So when you look at the totality of the evidence, the calculated silent entry, the self-sabotage of leaving pristine DNA, the organized attempt to book theater tickets, it points to a killer operating with an extreme duality. How does forensic psychology even begin to synthesize these contradictions?
We classify this as a mixed offender profile. The organization elements are clear. The specific weapon choice, the planning to scale the fence, the gloves he used to prevent fingerprints, and that initial silent neutralization of the child. But the disorganization is overwhelming. Leaving his own clothes, the weapon, his blood everywhere, and that prolonged, incredibly risky stay. This suggests an individual with enough cognitive ability to plan an attack, but who either completely decompensated or was driven by a profound psychopathology once the violence actually began.
It seems like the killing itself was the point, not the outcome. The motive points so far away from simple material gain.
Absolutely. The consensus strongly points toward territorial thrill and the enactment of a dominance fantasy. The extended stay, the eating, the browsing, it was all about mastering the house, replacing the family, and demonstrating total control over that domestic space. The noise complaints or the territorial conflict likely just served as the necessary trigger, the perceived slight that gave permission for a deep-seated pathology to be released into extreme lethal action.
So given this wealth of physical evidence, the clothes, the shoes, the DNA, why has this case become an investigative black hole for over 2 decades?
The primary failure really lies in the historical context of the year 2000. It's that globalization gap again. If the killer was, as the evidence suggests, transient, a foreign exchange student, a temporary construction worker, someone who immediately returned to Korea, China, or the US, the Tokyo police simply did not have the mechanism to cross-reference his DNA profile with international databases. Japan's domestic database was excellent, but internationally, the trail went cold almost immediately.
Were there internal investigative missteps as well?
Yes, there were some early challenges. While the blood DNA is solid, some reports suggest that early contamination by well-meaning but ill-prepared first responders may have hampered some of the environmental evidence. Furthermore, the police initially developed a very strong case around the local skater angle, which may have led to a kind of tunnel vision on local youth, allowing a potentially semi-local or transient killer to slip out of the region entirely.
One of the most fascinating leads that emerged years later was the yakiniku tip. This was a huge missed opportunity, wasn't it?
It was a crucial piece of anecdotal evidence. Years after the crime, a tipster provided a highly detailed description of a man seen at a yakiniku, a Korean BBQ restaurant, shortly after the murder. The man matched the general suspect profile and, critically, had a conspicuous, fresh, deep cut on his right hand, perfectly consistent with the injury the killer sustained when the Yanagiba knife slipped.
And what connected this man to the geography of the crime?
The witness reportedly identified the man as a temporary worker who was involved in the Setagaya Park expansion construction. This elegantly tied together the drifter worker theory with the specific geographical knowledge required to execute the entry and the evasion.
So what happened? Why did the lead die?
The nature of the era and the environment just proved fatal to the lead. Yakiniku restaurants are cash-heavy places, so there were no credit card transactions, no identification records. The difficulty of verifying memory decades later, combined with that lack of identifying documents, meant that even this highly specific, compelling lead could not be converted into an arrest. The trail went cold again.
So finally, what has been the enduring sociological and legal legacy of the Setagaya murders on Japanese society?
The impact was immediate and profound. The entire concept of the domestic sanctuary was just destroyed. Post-2000, Japan saw an industry explosion in home security systems, monitored locks, window bars. The traditional, trusting open-door culture of suburban life effectively vanished overnight.
And this case became the flashpoint for the debate on DNA privacy.
Absolutely. Because the killer's DNA was known but yielded no match, the Setagaya case became the central, powerful argument for proponents of establishing a universal DNA database and implementing controversial familial DNA searching in Japan strategies that were previously opposed due to very strong privacy concerns. The pressure to solve this monumental case continues to push legal and social boundaries. The high reward, 20 million yen, the highest in Japanese history, it keeps the case alive in the public consciousness, but it also necessitates an unending drain on police resources to sift through false or misleading tips.
So we stand here with an overflowing inventory of clues, but absolutely no resolution. The profile is that of a drifter in the interstice, someone who possessed Korean-sourced shoes, American-associated perfume, a specific Asian DNA profile with Southern European markers, and an intimate knowledge of a Tokyo skate park. This duality defines the crime.
The forensic reality suggests a highly marginalized, cold-blooded killer, likely a local or semi-local youth of mixed Asian-European heritage, integrated enough into Japanese consumer culture to buy Uniqlo, but desperate or disturbed enough to commit a massacre over a perceived slight. His cold-blooded nature stemmed not from professional training, but from a terrifying fundamental lack of empathy and a desire for absolute dominance.
The killer is almost certainly still alive today, likely in his mid-40s, carrying a healed scar on his right hand, potentially walking with that characteristic slight supination. The empty land where the Miyazawa house once stood remains a monument to the fragility of safety and the persistence of trauma.
And the final resolution, we believe, it probably won't come from traditional police work, but from the inevitable advancement of genetic genealogy and the expansion of global DNA tracing networks. Until that day, the core societal question remains. The most compelling evidence points to someone with a local grievance, but of mixed or foreign roots. So does society prefer the easy external explanation, the foreign hitman, or the organized criminal, or the difficult internal truth that the killer may have been a product of its own fractured modern urban existence? That choice defines the true cost of the Setagaya family murders.
Thank you for joining us on the deep dive.